everybody. Thanks for being here. I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Nordrum, and I'm an executive editor at MIT Technology Review, based on MIT's campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have a really fun job, and one of the most fun things that I get to work on every year is producing our team's annual list of 10 breakthrough technologies, which I'm going to tell you all about today. Our newsroom has produced this list for 23 years, and it highlights the technologies that we think matter most right now. And I think there are some interesting lessons on this list for how technologies get developed and commercialized. So for example, this year we have a medical treatment that began in an academic lab and is now being brought to market by a company that has licensed that patent. We have a new consumer gadget made by a major global tech company. And we have a new twist on geothermal energy that's gotten tens of millions of dollars in funding from the Department of Energy for demonstration projects. I also hope talking through this list gives you a good sense of what's happening across the technology landscape broadly, maybe outside of your specific industries or areas of expertise. Hopefully you've heard of MIT Technology Review, but if not, allow me to just briefly introduce ourselves. We are a newsroom owned by MIT, and this year we're celebrating 125 years of publishing. We are editorially independent, so we don't write about MIT. We cover the broader world of technology. Our main beat areas are artificial intelligence, climate technology, biotechnology, and computing. So we have a team of journalists and editors who are looking across all of those areas every day, speaking with sources, reading up on scientific papers, and trying to figure out what technologies and trends people should know about. I always like to say we don't write about technology for technology's sake, and we don't cover technology in a vacuum. We're always careful to include social and economic and political context, because we know that these are the things that determine how a technology makes its way out into the world. Those decisions around how it's made and deployed really determine whether a technology is a force for good in the world and provides greater quality of life and prosperity for more people, or could cause harm and contribute to greater inequity. Every day we're publishing stories on our website, and we also put out a free daily newsletter that you should all sign up for if you haven't already. It's called The Download. You can keep up with all the things that we report on. And we still have a print magazine that we put out twice every other month, 6 times a year. This is our latest issue here that's on newsstands now. Every issue is on a different theme, and this is the play issue. So in this issue, we have stories about surf pools being built to make it possible to surf anywhere, even far inland. We have a story about sneaker companies that are trying to make the world's most advanced running shoe, and some of those shoes are only meant to be worn for one race. And the cover story here is about gaming companies that are trying to use generative AI tools to create non-playable characters that can have unscripted conversations with players. So lots of good stuff in this issue. Before I get to this year's list of 10 breakthrough technologies, I just wanted to say a few words about how this list comes together every year. So every summer, our team of journalists and editors starts brainstorming ideas for the next year's list. We have a bunch of meetings where everybody brings ideas and writes up pitches for the technologies that they think should make the list from their respective area that they follow and cover. And then we debate a whole bunch, and we take a staff vote at some point just to see what people are most excited about. And in the end, we always have to make some agonizing decisions, because there's only 10 on the list. And I'll tell you about some of those decisions and some of the things we left out later on. So this is a whole process that we go through every year, and what we're looking for is really technologies that have the potential to make a wide impact on the world and really change the way that we live or work in the decades or years to come. And like I said, we've been doing this for 23 years, so I am proud to say that we have gotten some things right in that time. Through this annual process of debating these technologies, we've been early to spot some things that really did go on to have great commercial success or change the way that we live and work. And here's a few examples. On our very first list in 2001, we had natural language processing, which today underpins all the generative AI models and tools that we're out there using. Our picks in 2010 and 2011 for cloud programming and cloud streaming forecasted the growth of cloud computing, which really changed the way computing got done and anticipated one of the main applications in streaming. And then I'm curious, how many of you have a smartwatch on right now? Yeah, that's a good chunk. So we had smartwatches on the list in 2013. 2 years later, the Apple Watch came out, and smartwatch sales have soared ever since. And then reusable rockets we put on the list in 2016, and today SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets, several of those have made about 20 trips each, so this one is also really happening. But full transparency, we do not always get it right. We've definitely had some misses over the years. Predicting the future of technology turns out very difficult. It's hard to tell what kinds of things are going to catch on and really stand the test of time. So full disclosure, here are some of the things we've gotten wrong over the years. In 2013, we put Baxter the robot on the list. This is a manufacturing robot. It's that big one there on the right. It was a really slick-looking robot, got lots of press attention, and it was meant to work on an assembly line alongside a human, helping them put things together in a factory. But it didn't really work as well as people thought it might, and so 5 years after we put it on the list, the company that made it went bankrupt and shut down. And then we had Alphabet's Project Loon on the list in 2015. You may remember this was a bold experiment to bring internet access to remote areas using high-altitude balloons. And in this case, the technology worked pretty well, but there was no viable business model for it. So Alphabet shut down the project in 2021. And then in 2011, we really thought that gestural interfaces would be the next big thing. So devices loaded with sensors that could pick up on your hand motions and use that to carry out commands. But instead, we all started using our voice to command things like Siri and Alexa and Echo to do things for us. So this one didn't really happen, although I will say there is a device on this year's list that uses gestures to carry out commands, so we might have just been ahead of our time on that one. All right, so that's just a little bit about MIT Technology Review and how the list comes together. Now let's talk about the 10 breakthrough technologies of 2024. This one probably won't surprise you. It's been a crazy couple of years for artificial intelligence, and this first item is really our attempt to sum all of that up. This is really the first year that people in the general public started getting their hands on AI tools and using them to do all kinds of things in their own lives, interacting directly with AI for the first time. And this was all set off by the debut of ChatGPT almost 2 years ago now. Since then, there's been an explosion of interest and investment in generative AI, and there's all kinds of new tools out there that today can generate not just text, but also audio and video and code and a million other things. And there's many more large companies trying to integrate these tools into their services and products. So Adobe now has Firefly directly integrated into its photo editing software. Microsoft, of course, has been a huge partner of and investor in OpenAI and has started integrating its models into the new Bing search. And Microsoft's also developing tools for software developers using generative AI. And of course, Google released Gemini earlier this year and has started to bake it into search as well as Gmail and Google Docs as well. So there's a lot happening here, and it's really just getting started. Next, we have super efficient solar cells, which is our term for solar cells that add a layer of perovskites, which is a tiny crystal that absorbs different wavelengths of light than a typical silicon cell. So solar cells made using perovskites can be more efficient at converting energy from the sun into electricity. And one of the leaders in this space, a company called Oxford PV, has said that it plans to begin shipping these panels made with perovskites to customers for the first time this year. There's also been large solar manufacturers, including First Solar here in the Midwest, that are investing in this technology and acquiring startups that are working on it. I will say perovskites are a notoriously tricky material to work with. They break down very easily, including when they're exposed to like humidity and heat and light, which is not great for a solar substance. And so these companies are going to have to show that their panels can be as durable as what's already on the market and at a comparable cost. But they're working on it, and there's been a lot of progress, more investment in this area, more interest in it, and there's been some progress on trying to encapsulate the panels so that there's less humidity and moisture that gets into them, which should definitely help. So we're excited to see what happens here. Back in February, Apple released its first mixed reality headset, the Apple Vision Pro. So this is a headset that overlays a bit of digital content onto your physical real-world surroundings. So you can, while wearing it, you can still see what's going on around you, but you've got extra digital content overlaid on top of that real-world environment. And this headset used a micro OLED display, which is the highest resolution display of any headset to ever hit the market. I tried this out. Maybe some of you have a chance to check it out or buy it yourself. I've tried it out in the Apple Store a couple of months ago, and I got to say the 3D videos really did blow my mind. They make you feel like you're right there at the table of a birthday party or in front row of a concert. So that was pretty cool to see. This has not, I will say, been a commercial success. It's a very expensive device, $3,500, and there's no obvious killer app for it, no reason that people have really got to have it. But the micro OLED display, being the highest resolution display ever made, we felt like that was a true technical breakthrough, and Apple had a tremendous track record, obviously, of introducing new consumer devices, so we did include it on the list. These, I'm sure you've also heard of. This is a new class of weight loss medications that have come into the public consciousness recently. These are diabetes drugs, traditionally, that have been found to help people lose about 15% of their body weight, which could obviously be a massive benefit for both individual and public health. Obesity is a problem in many parts of the world. The World Health Organization has declared it an epidemic. And since these drugs debuted, there's also been new evidence showing they might not just help people lose weight, but also protect against heart failure, heart attacks, and strokes. Geothermal energy is a really good, reliable, stable source of renewable energy, but until now it's only been possible in some places where there's a heat source pretty close to the surface. But now, using techniques borrowed from the oil and gas industry, including fracking, geothermal companies are finding ways to drill into rocks, inject water, and extract geothermal heat in more places. One company that's leading in this area is called Fervo, and they demonstrated that this was possible at a pilot plant last summer, and then began delivering electricity to the grid in Nevada back in November. And Fervo was also on our 2023 list of climate tech companies to watch, which we're also just about to update, and we'll have out a new version of that within the next month or so. If you're here, you're probably familiar with Moore's Law, so you know that the number of transistors on a chip has been doubling about every 2 years for decades now, as engineers find clever ways to make transistors smaller and smaller. But that is getting harder to do, so now more chip manufacturers are turning to chiplets, which are smaller, more specialized versions of conventional computer chips that can be linked together in different ways to make systems that perform similarly to a conventional computer chip. There's a couple of potential advantages of doing this. They might be cheaper to manufacture, and they could also be easier to swap out if one of them malfunctions. And there's also been more investment and interest within the industry in creating standards for these chiplets to make them interoperable with each other, which should also really help boost adoption in the years to come. Back in December, the US Food and Drug Administration approved the first ever treatment based on CRISPR in the US. This was a treatment for sickle cell disease, and it also got approval in the UK just about a month prior to that. If you're interested in this, we published an op-ed by a patient who was one of the first ever to receive CRISPR treatment. He was in the clinical trial for this, and he wrote about his experience and how this treatment has really changed his life. This is just the first of many that we expect to see, and this is really exciting because CRISPR was discovered more than a decade ago now, and we're finally seeing it make its way into medical treatments for real people. Today, there's new versions of CRISPR and new, many more treatments based on the gene editing tool in the pipeline, and so we expect to see many more of these to come. This is a fun one. There's a new generation of very powerful computers coming online called exascale computers. And these machines can perform an exaflop's worth of calculations. And that is a 1 followed by 18 zeros. So that means these machines are as powerful as 100,000 laptops combined. The US got its first one last year called Frontier, and the EU got its first one called Jupiter earlier this year. And what these machines will be especially good at is performing really powerful simulations of complicated stuff. So phenomena like turbulence, or stuff like the universe and how galaxies form, or things like weather and climate modeling. They'll be much better at all of those things. Heat pumps are really an older technology, but we put them on the list this year because sales have really started to take off, especially in Europe during the energy crisis. And if you're not familiar, these are appliances that can both heat and cool a space using electricity much more efficiently than a gas furnace. And they're really starting to take off here too. In fact, in 2022, heat pump sales surpassed gas furnaces for the first time in the United States. And last but not least, we have Twitter killers, which is our term for all the new social media platforms and options that have popped up since Twitter, or X, has lost users and advertisers. So we're talking here about Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads. A lot of these are built on decentralized protocols that allow users to have more control over the data that they share and their experience on the platforms. And you may remember that soon after Threads launched, it had more than 100 million monthly users immediately after, so it was taking off really quickly. So there you have it. That's our list of 10 breakthrough technologies for 2024. You may not agree with everything on this list, and that's fine. I actually would love to hear from you later, afterward, if you think that we missed something that should have been on this year's list, or if you disagree with one of these items. I love discussing it with people. And I will say that we always try to ground our picks in scientific and economic reality, and I'm always very proud of the list that we come up with. But as I mentioned before, the future is impossible to predict, so take all this with a grain of salt. Now that we've been through what's on the list, I did want to tell you about a few things that came up in our early discussions for this year's list that we did not end up including, because I think there's some interesting stories in there about how we make our decisions and why we picked what we picked and why we leave stuff off. So first we have solar geoengineering. Our team has been reporting on a number of really interesting solar geoengineering experiments recently, and if you're not familiar, solar geoengineering involves releasing particles into the stratosphere that reflect the sun's energy back out to space. And this is sometimes proposed as a way to combat global warming, because you're essentially cooling the planet by doing that. But this is a really controversial idea in scientific communities. Some scientists don't even think we should discuss it, and there's no real sense of what it would mean to carry this out at a global scale. But we thought about including it because our team has reported on a number of small-scale demonstration projects that different companies and researchers have started to do around the world that have sparked a big conversation around this technology. In fact, Mexico ended up banning solar geoengineering experiments as a result of some of the early reporting on this. But ultimately, we just weren't sure where this was headed and what impact these small-scale, early-stage experiments would have. And so we just decided to kind of watch this space. There's also a new class of Alzheimer's drugs that are coming to the market. Alzheimer's is a disease that causes you to lose memory, and patients really haven't had many options for how to treat it up to this point. But now there are new medicines coming out. One from Biogen got approval last year, and there was one from Eli Lilly that was approved earlier this year. And these drugs have been shown to slow cognitive decline by clearing out harmful plaques that build up in the brain. But the benefits are kind of modest. They buy you months, not years. And these drugs do have some pretty severe side effects that happened in a fair number of patients and which can be fatal, including brain swelling and bleeding. So in this case, we just weren't really sure if the benefits would outweigh the risks for most people, so we decided to leave it off this year. Last year, there was a really interesting proof of concept experiment done by some scientists in Japan who showed that it was possible to create a healthy offspring from two mice of the same sex. So they took two male mice, they took cells from two male mice, transferred some of those into eggs, transformed some of those into eggs, fertilized them, and then implanted the embryo into a female mouse, showing that it's possible to create offspring from two mice of the same sex, which is really cool and kind of mind-blowing. And who knows, someday this might be possible in other animals, maybe even humans. But as I'm sure you know, stuff that works in mice often does not work in people. So instead of featuring it this year, we just decided to wait for now. All right, so that's what made the list and what didn't make the list. And then I have one more thing for you all. Every year we have our audience vote on what we call the 11th breakthrough. And this year we gave them 4 options. This is like a People's Choice Award. They could vote on lab-grown meat, robotaxis, thermal batteries, or SpaceX's Starship. We got more than 11,000 votes for the 11th breakthrough this year, and it really wasn't even close. Turns out thermal batteries beat lab-grown meat by like more than double the number of votes. And I was impressed that both of those did better than SpaceX's Starship, which I kind of thought would win. If you don't know what thermal batteries are, these are systems that store renewable energy as heat, and sometimes they use the storage medium use bricks for the storage medium. And these systems could help decarbonize facilities that rely on a lot of heat to make stuff like cement and glass. All right, now it's your turn. If you have an idea for what technology we should feature on the 2025 list of 10 breakthrough technologies, I would love to hear from you, because we are going through this whole process right now with our staff. We're brainstorming ideas for next year's list. We're surveying the landscape of all these emerging technologies, and I'm really curious to hear what you would put on the list. So if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a Google form. Just says, what technology would you nominate and why? And we ask for your email so that if we do pick your technology, I can follow up with you about that. And I would really love to hear any suggestions that you have. If you've got multiple ideas, go ahead and submit the form multiple times. That's great. A few of the things that we look for when we're considering technologies for these lists, we really want them to be a technology that is having some kind of breakthrough moment. And you can define that a couple of different ways. It could be a scientific advance that has made this new technology possible for the first time. It could be that a technology has passed an important commercial milestone, such as demonstrating that it's possible to scale it up in a significant way. Or in the case of like a biomedical treatment, it could be that it's passed some regulatory hurdle. So it's gotten approval or it's been able to pass a stage 3 clinical trial. These are all things that make a technology a breakthrough technology in our eyes. So if you've got ideas, go ahead and fill out the form. I would love to see what you all come up with, and I'm sure you'll have some excellent suggestions there. So this is, again, the full list with the 11th breakthrough included. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this list as well afterward, if anybody wants to share. And if you would like a discounted subscription to MIT Technology Review, you can scan this QR code, and it'll take you to a page where you can sign up for that. We are a nonprofit newsroom, and we rely on subscribers to fund the original in-depth reporting that we do. And whether it's us or another media outlet, I always like to say that subscribing is the best thing that you can do to support high-quality journalism in the year of 2024. So if there's something that you're reading, watching, listening to on a regular basis that you really love, I encourage you to subscribe. All right, so that's our 10 breakthroughs list. Now let's take a step back. I mentioned earlier that we are celebrating our 125th anniversary as a publication. So I thought I would take this opportunity to talk with you a little bit about the conversations we've had around that anniversary. We've been looking back and revisiting our past coverage, but we've also been looking ahead and thinking about what the next 125 years might hold. So tomorrow, actually, we're releasing a brand new issue. This is going to be out on newsstands soon, so you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek here of this cover. And if you do subscribe, you'll get this in your mailbox, and you'll be able to access it through our app. This is an anniversary issue celebrating our 125th. And we've got some really interesting stuff in here. We have an essay about how the rise of video content is reshaping the way that we learn and interact online. We have a story about the future of sex and porn and what role AI might play in that. And speaking of AI, we also have the well-known futurist Ray Kurzweil, who's written about his vision for where this is all headed. And he has predicted that by the end of this century, computers will surpass humans at every cognitive task. And he says we'll also have all these super intelligent AIs that are out there just producing goods and services for everybody so efficiently that they're essentially free. And one of the interesting consequences that he lays out in this issue that I thought was really fascinating was for learning. He says today, most of us are learning really as a means to an end. We go to school so that we can get into a good college, so that we can get a good job, so that we can make money. But in this future world that he envisions, when AI is producing everything we need for essentially free, we could just learn for the sake of learning. We could follow our own interest, our own curiosity. We could explore whatever topics we want. Maybe we'll have more time to come up with new ideas and debate and discuss them with each other. And learning itself might get easier because we might all have personalized AI tutors that know our learning style and how we learn best and can adapt lessons and material to help us learn more efficiently. Or maybe we can create multimedia-rich virtual worlds in which we can immerse ourselves and absorb whatever lessons we want. So there's a lot to ponder in this issue. And in these next few slides, I'm just going to take you through a couple of other topics and technologies and themes that came to the surface for us as we were going through this whole exercise of what the next 125 years of technology might hold. Let's start with gene editing, which is making changes to our DNA, the very stuff that makes us who we are. This is a really hot topic of biotechnology, and there's a number of reasons that you might want to do this to protect someone against hereditary disease or lower their chances of getting a genetic condition that they're predisposed to, or possibly even pick the hair color and eye color of a baby if that's where we want to take things here. One of our senior biomedicine editor, Antonio Regalado, is actually the reporter who broke a big story 6 years ago about the world's first gene-edited babies. They were created by a scientist in China who edited 3 embryos to protect those babies against HIV. It's very controversial at the time. That scientist ended up going to prison for 3 years after that news broke. Today, Antonio is reporting on efforts to make changes that are already occurring in some portion of the human population, just more common through gene editing, because these changes are desirable for some reason. For example, a tiny change in a gene called the APP gene is thought to protect against Alzheimer's. And some people just happen to have it now out there in the world, and they're lucky because they have a lower chance of developing Alzheimer's, but we could give that protection to many more people through gene editing, and there's many examples of this, of other things like this. But right now, CRISPR is really difficult to administer, and it's also very expensive. The treatment that we featured on our list for sickle cell disease, made by a company called Vertex, costs $2 million. So the challenges around administering CRISPR and the expense of it are going to limit availability still for some time here. Another topic that our biotech team has really been following closely is longevity and attempts to extend human lifespans. So our senior biomedicine reporter, Jess Hamzalou, recently was playing around with the UK Office for National Statistics life expectancy calculator. She lives in the UK, and so the office there has this calculator that you can put in your age and sex, and it'll tell you about how many years you've got left. So for Jess, it predicted that she would live to be about 88 years old, and it gave her a 1 in 10 chance of making it to 100. I did this as well. You can try it too. The US Social Security Administration has a similar life expectancy calculator. In my case, it estimated that I would live to be 85. I'm 36 now, so I'll take it. But the record for the oldest human to ever live, they made it to 122 years old. So it is already possible to live much longer. And now researchers and tech entrepreneurs in particular are trying to push the limits of that and see just how long humans can live. A lot of investment and interest coming into this area as well, and there's a couple of different approaches that they're trying. I'll just mention 2 here. One is cellular reprogramming, which is attempting to take adult cells and turn back the clock on those to make them younger, more like stem cells that could then develop into any kind of cell. And if this works, it could make it possible to treat disease by, for example, replacing somebody's cells with more of their own cells, healthy versions of those cells. But this is a pretty inefficient technique right now, and there's also some safety concerns around it. Another approach is clearing out older cells called senescent cells that can build up in tissues and cause damage. And there's been some promising results in mice along these lines, but those have so far failed to translate very well into human research, so we'll see what happens there. There's also an X Prize out there for $101 million for any scientist who can come up with a way to restore 10 years worth of cognitive, immune, and muscular function to elderly people. So if any of you have an idea out there for how to do that, that $101 million could be yours. This is all really tricky though, because there's still a lot we don't know about the biology of aging and the underlying mechanisms of it all. And there's also a fair question that you could ask, which is, do we need this? Do we need to live longer? Is that necessary? Is that where we should be spending our time and resources? I think there's a lot of questions that would come up for society if all of us just lived forever. What would that look like? What would it mean for society to function like that? Personally, I'm going for quality over quantity. I would rather have more healthy years than just more years tacked on to the end, but that's just me. Your opinion may differ. Another question our team is really interested in is, will these tremendous AI advances that we've seen happen, particularly with regard to generative AI, translate into actual economic progress and greater prosperity for more people? It's not a given that it will. There's no economic law or rule out there saying that if you've got tremendous technological progress, it translates into a greater well-being for more people. In order to do that, it would need to positively impact some of the biggest sectors of the economy, things like manufacturing, healthcare, and education, and make workers in those areas much more productive. So could AI, for example, help a machine technician on a factory floor troubleshoot a piece of equipment more quickly, and get that factory line back up and running? Or could it help the manager lay out the design of the assembly line to operate more efficiently? Or could it accelerate our scientific process and help us discover new drugs more quickly, get them through clinical trials more quickly, or help us come up with new ideas for materials that have specific types of properties that we might need for clean energy technologies, for example. Any of those things, if AI could do it really, really well, could be transformational to the economy. So maybe it will. There's some early signs that workers in specific cases have been made more productive by using generative AI tools in particular. There's been a couple of studies showing that lower skilled workers who use generative AI produce results on the level of higher skilled workers. So for example, if you're not a great writer, it can really help you become a pretty good writer. But if you're already a great writer, it's probably not going to help you that much. And there's also been productivity gains shown for customer service agents and coders who work with generative AI. So in those specific areas, there is evidence showing that those workers can be more productive. But the reality is that large parts of the economy, AI is just still starting to make its way in very narrow use cases. And there's a lot of issues with it still. A lot of these generative models are hallucinating all the time. They're making stuff up, which is a real problem in a sector like healthcare. There's major concerns that companies have about putting their proprietary data into these models, which then might use it for training or regurgitate it to somebody else. Concerns around data privacy, and all of that would need to be worked through in a big way before this kind of transformational economic impact might materialize. If that does happen, if it all works out and AI turns out to be the engine of tremendous economic progress, there's sort of a different question that comes up around global wealth inequality and whether having access to AI will drive that further. And this is a concern not just within countries themselves, but also between countries. So, will it cause rich nations to get richer and poor nations to fall further behind? One theory about this is that wealthier nations with low birth rates might invest more heavily into AI and automation because as people in those economies retire, there's fewer and fewer workers to replace them and get all the work done that needs to get done. So their ratio of workers to retirees is out of whack. Immigration would be one way to solve that, just bringing more people into the country, but at current levels, that's probably still not enough to replace all the people that are retiring. So if those economies decide to go big into AI and automation and invest tremendously in that area and it drives greater economic progress, will poorer nations that don't have those resources and same incentives, will the gap between those two widen? This is where I like to say that none of this is inevitable. It is up to us to decide how we deploy these technologies into our society, and we are in control of this process here. Last but not least, this is a chunk of neodymium, which is a metal that we're going to need a lot more of in the future. It's used in wind turbines and all kinds of other stuff. And this is really part of a bigger story about this massive energy transition that our world is under right now, from fossil fuel-based sources of energy to clean, renewable sources that don't produce emissions and accelerate climate change. Our climate team is following lots of different aspects of this story. This is one of my favorite beats. It's just endlessly interesting to me. And one of the things that they're following closely is the surge of demand for materials like this, as well as lithium, copper, nickel, all the things that we're going to need to make all the stuff we need for a clean energy economy. Solar cells, batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, et cetera. And how all of that is driving more demand for mining and more of a need for mining around the world. And then what that means for the communities where those mines are located and how we can do mining more responsibly and sustainably, since we're going to need a lot more of it. There's other ways to solve that problem as well. There's new efforts to produce magnets now that do not rely on rare earth metals. And there are a lot of recycling efforts ramping up too, especially for batteries, which we need a ton of to power electric cars and electric planes and for grid storage and for lots of other reasons. So there's serious efforts now around battery recycling and finding ways to take all those batteries in and break them down to their various components and then recycle them into new batteries. All right, that's what I have for you today. Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure and honor to share this work with you. Again, this is the QR code if you would like to subscribe, or you can go to our site and sign up for that free daily newsletter called The Download if you want to follow along with our coverage on these and other topics. And yeah, I would love to hear from any of you later. If you have thoughts about our list of 2024 breakthrough technologies, I'd love to to hear your reactions to those, or of course suggestions that you didn't get to submit earlier when the QR code was up. I'm happy to take a couple of questions. We've got a little bit of time left if anybody has any. You just have to yell because it's a little bit loud in here. Yes? Louder, sorry. Can you say a little louder? Check, check. Okay, she was asking about, as a journalist, how do I see AI impacting my field, which is the number one existential question that we get as journalists reporting on AI these days, kind of a meta question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm excited about some of the use cases I've seen for using generative AI tools. There's a lot of conversation around this at media conferences too. I'm going to one next month, and like half the sessions are about using AI as a tool in your own work. So there's been some interesting demonstrations of using it for translation. So we publish in English, and so imagine being able to translate all of our work into many, many more languages and make that work more accessible to more people, or for us to be able to use translation services to be able to read studies in all these different languages. That's really exciting to me. There's also been some interesting tools developed that newsrooms have used around like scraping public records or public documents or public comments for legislation. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. So if you can find a reliable generative AI tool that can summarize that for you, or that can help you search it in a meaningful way, that could help you just do a better job in your own work. I'm not as concerned, I will say, about our newsroom. We're not using AI to like write drafts or anything like that. So I feel still that there's a lot of value in bringing new information to the internet, which is what the best original journalism does. And these models are by definition trained on information that already exists and has already been scraped from the internet. And so I think there will still be a lot of demand for that kind of original reporting. I'm excited for the ways that it might make our work easier. I would love for an AI agent to go around and schedule all my calls and draft some emails for me. I would find that really useful. But I still believe that there will be a role for journalists to play in actually surfacing that new information and putting it together. Yes?
But what about...
Oh, thank you so much. That's helpful.
I believe it was last year that we may have entered into the loneliness epidemic and all that. Have you guys discussed anything about how to improve how we use all this free time now that AI can solve a lot of the tedious stuff?
I mean, that's a great question, and kind of gets back to that point of do we need more life, or do we just need kind of different ways of thinking about the time that we have? I mean, there's it's a lot. There's a lot of discussion too around like smartphones and what they, whether the device itself has created more of that loneliness. I tend to fall on the side of it's more what you do. It's a device. It's a tool. It can be more about connecting you to people that you aren't nearby. Like we all had the Zoom parties during the pandemic or whatever, when we were all so isolated and just wanted to connect with one another. Or if you're just like scrolling endlessly and comparing yourself to others on social media, like that's obviously going to have like a different impact on you. So I try to think of it as a tool in my own life and be conscious of just how I'm spending my time, because it's like very easy to get into certain habits or to keep scrolling in a certain way. But I do think of it as a tool like that, and I feel like a lot of these things we ought to think of them that way, and then kind of just have a more make a more conscious decision about how we want to integrate them into our lives, and when they're serving us and when they're not. I feel like that's generally the best approach for me that I've found. Yes, yeah, that mic helps a lot. Thank you.
So when you guys are compiling this list, how do you take regulation for some of these technologies into consideration, like whether that be in the future or what's going on now?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes it is the reason for us putting something on the list. So the CRISPR treatment, there's lots of ideas out there for new medical treatments, but regulatory approval is pretty important in that industry for something to become real and to actually have impact on people's lives. So, that FDA approval is what made us decide to put that sickle cell treatment on the list. In other areas, it's not as clear. Like AI, is a massive area right now, and there's so much regulation happening, like the EU AI Act, the executive order the Biden administration had on AI last fall. There's a million versions of it. Some of it's more focused on specific use cases. Some of it's more focused on like the highest risk, possible ways that AI could be deployed. So in that area, we made it like a broader item, AI for everything, knowing that through the regulatory process is still very much in the works there, and it's not yet clear how that will all pan out. But we do think that this is like a transformational technology that's going to impact many sectors, and no matter how the regulations, that will shape how it makes its way out into the world. But it's going to be something that's here to stay and that we'll be continuing with for years. So we're always thinking about it, and we do quite a bit of policy reporting. The climate category especially, a couple of these things have gotten huge amounts of funding through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the big spending packages, the big infrastructure projects that have been supported. So geothermal project I mentioned, and a couple of items that we're considering for this year's list are also benefiting greatly. And so they're making faster progress because they've got this huge amount of funding coming into them from the federal government and these industrial policies that are being put out there. So that's always it's part of the discussion always, and then the way we consider it and the way it factors in kind of depends on the sector and the technology that we're talking about. All right, I can take one more. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious, with all the research that the MIT Technology Review's done on AI specifically, is there anything out there you found to help reduce bias and kind of plays more into the ethics and morals of AI? Because the way I understand it, the learning's only as good as the information it's receiving, and whoever's giving the information may not be free from those things. So I was just curious what your guys' take was on some of that conversation around AI, and eventually, as you said, at the end of the century, it replacing all human cognitive functions on its own. So that's one of my biggest curiosities for the conversation.
Totally. I mean, you're right to bring it up, and this has been a big area of reporting for us and a major concern, and just a very obvious problem with a lot of these models from the time that they're put out. So there's, the companies are very, I would say, aware of this problem and quite nervous about it, I think, and so they're doing a lot internally to try and mitigate the bias that does just fundamentally exist in the thing that they've created, because it's scraping information from online. And one of our reporters, senior AI reporter Melissa Hakela, she is of Asian heritage, and so she was generating avatars of herself in some of these, using one of these models, and our coworkers who are like white and male, it was just spitting out images of them as like astronauts and firefighters and all kinds of stuff, and then her it was like these highly sexualized images, and she wrote a whole story about it. Because of the data that it's trained on, it's much more likely to do that for women, and particularly for Asian women. So there's all kinds of bias. There's all kinds of examples of this. The companies, I will say, I think because of public reporting and scrutiny and, a lot of researchers and ethicists bringing up this problem, it's not like they solved it before they put the models out. They just put it out, and they're like, we're working on this bias problem. We know it exists. So they're red teaming their own model. They're, trying to, they're censoring certain things that you can search for. They're not allowing you to search for certain kinds of offensive material, and then they're trying to check it for certain searches that might produce biased results, and then manually go back and basically reprogram the model and the way it was trained so it doesn't produce those biased results. And there's been some strange overcorrections that Google and Gemini faced. It's still a very much a problem and a work in progress. I mean, I'm glad they're doing that. I'm hopeful that we can make progress there, but it is just a fundamental thing you have to contend with the way these models are trained, that they're just inherently biased. And I hope that more people know that and go in knowing that, so that they can kind of scrutinize the results as well, and not maybe just take them at face value and say, okay, well, knowing what it's trained on, what are the issues that this model might have, and how should I treat this tool in my life? But yeah, very good concern, and one that we've definitely reported on and we'll keep reporting on for sure. Okay, that's all the time I have for, but I will be hanging around here if you've got any other ideas or reactions or questions for me. And thank you all very much. Really appreciate the time.